one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Thursday, December 4th, and, like you do at 8 a.m. Eastern, my neighborhood is redoing some of our concrete around the sidewalks, and so if you hear my dogs, Copper and Todd, commenting or chiming in on all of the political news of the day, know that there may be some distractions in the background, but so far they're doing good, and they say good morning to all of you, and especially I think actually they will love this show today. I'm very excited for this show because we're going to be talking about a lot of legal news coming out. There's so much going on, and it was actually, really incredible prepping for this show, how many different things we need to talk about this morning. And the first one is a really fascinating topic that we have been talking about since Biden, and this is Trump doubling down on voiding the Biden auto pin actions, including pardons and commutations. So Fox Digital, it's coming from Fox News, of course, confirmed that former President Biden signed son Hunter's pardon by hand, not by autopin. So ostensibly, this controversy would not cover Hunter's pardon. But what about people like Dr. Fauci? That one, in my opinion, at least to the American people, is even more important. But President Trump announced in a Truth Social post on Tuesday that he would, quote, fully and completely terminate any documents signed by former President Joe Biden's autopin, including those pardons and commutations. He said this: any and all documents, proclamations, executive orders, memorandums, or contracts signed by order of the now infamous and unauthorized autopin within the administration of Joseph R. Biden Jr. are hereby null, void, and of no further force or effect. Anyone receiving, and then he puts these in quotation marks, pardons, commutations, or any other legal document so signed, please be advised that said document has been fully and completely terminated and is of no legal effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So what happens now? Well, let's welcome in Mike Donnelly, who is an attorney and has been a law professor and is one of the best to go to when we have, a really interesting I think, constitutional question here. So good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Jenna. Good morning to everybody this morning as we enter the Christmas season. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, and great to be back talking with you all today.
Yeah. So I know that you love this question, probably as much as I do, because it's such an interesting legal one. We don't actually have a lot of precedent on pardons. I mean, it's basically a function constitutionally that is absolute, it's granted to a sitting president for purposes of enacting a full measure of justice, generally when the justice system has failed, but it can be for any reason. The president doesn't even have to justify it. But when we're talking about an autopin, or whether or not the sitting president actually intended to use his pardon power, or as some have claimed, that Joe Biden's staffers, maybe his chief of staff, and others used his signature without his actual authority, does that change the constitutional question of the voidability of pardons?
I think it does, Jenna, and as we should always be guided by the details and what the Constitution says. And, I love President Trump, and it's always fun to read his Truth Social posts. And but he put a lot into that post. And, let's look at history and tradition and what the Constitution says. The Constitution does give the president the power to grant pardons. So that is something that the president can do. Executive orders are not in the Constitution. Proclamations are not in the Constitution. So there's a difference among some of these documents that President Trump is seeking to void. And I think those differences make a difference. And I think you're right to point out, did Joe Biden intend to pardon some of these people? Because the Constitution says the president shall have this power, not his aides, not an auto pen. And so there's a very real question of, did Joe Biden actually pardon some of these people? Did he actually know about Anthony Fauci? I'm going to guess he did, because that's very high profile. I don't know. I don't like the fact that Anthony Fauci got a pardon. I think he should be prosecuted, and he did terrible things to our country. And there are other people who got pardoned who did the same thing. But that's the president's prerogative. And, there's news about what President Trump just did. He pardoned Henry Cuellar, a Democrat. So, pardons kind of cut both ways. And it is the power, preference, privilege of the president under the Constitution to do that. Now, what happens next? Somebody's going to have to sue somebody or seek to prosecute somebody who was pardoned, and then it will go up to the Supreme Court. It'll take years to get there probably, but it's true that it's never been tested, this idea of the auto pen. Now, the auto pen has been used. It's been used for many years by presidents to sign proclamations, to sign commissions, legal documents. I think my commission in the United States Army in 1990, signed by George Bush, was probably signed by an auto pen. I don't think George Bush actually signed my commission. Does that make it any less legal? This is a question I think we should grapple with. I personally don't think that the president should be delegating any of his pardon power or signing bills in Congress. Like, if it's in the Constitution that he has the power to do this, even commissions is something we should probably grapple with a little bit. But the president should be exercising that power personally. He shouldn't be granting the staff or his advisors any authority to make those kinds of decisions. And if Joe Biden did do that and was not aware of specific pardons, I think there's a very real question about whether they have any effect.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important analysis, and it likely does turn on intent, not the actual use of the auto pen itself. And so, similarly, like when I was a clerk back in college, one of my jobs while I was in college, I clerked for a judge. And part of doing the job of a court clerk is that you stamp different orders with the judge's signature. And so that's similar to an auto pen, in that obviously the judge wasn't personally hand signing every single order. But the difference was I was not exercising my own personal view and commentary on what the order contained or what it signed. It was that I was simply processing the paperwork for what the judge had already determined and decided. And so there was no exercise of my authority because I had no judge authority. And so I think that that's really the difference here, is not so much the use itself of the auto pen, which I think you're right to point out that maybe we need to go back and recontemplate that and whether that's a good practice overall for something as significant as a presidential pardon or signing legislation or even commissions. I mean, obviously what a president does in terms of these types of proclamations and pardons can be even more significant than, the everyday sort of orders that judges give from the bench. But the question remains, was Joe Biden aware of this? And did he actually intend to issue these pardons? But the presumption here likely would be, and if I'm just taking, all politics out of it, whether or not I like these pardons or not, if I was adjudicating this matter, I would say, well, the presumption is that the pardons are valid, and because they have been signed by, even the auto pen that came from the White House, so it's presumptively valid. But now that the next president has signed an order declaring them void, do you think that shifts the presumption? Or when some of these may inevitably get challenged, is the presumption still that they're valid, and whoever is challenging the validity would still have to show that the president did not intend or wasn't aware or have some other kind of evidence that it almost similarly to some of the contract principles? I mean, where would the burden lie here?
Well, the Constitution gives the authority to the president to grant pardons. And so if it appears that the person has been granted a presidential pardon, I think there's a presumption that they have been pardoned. And, if a U.S. attorney wants to go after somebody like Anthony Fauci and seek to prosecute him for a crime for which he has allegedly been pardoned, I think the burden would be on the government. Look, this is a criminal matter we're talking about here. It is the burden of the government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person is guilty. So I think that would have to apply. First, you'd have to pierce the pardon in a sense. You're kind of referring to, the contract principles here. That's an interesting analogy, or piercing the corporate veil, right? To get at the officers of a corporation or the shareholders of the corporation. You have to pierce the pardon and demonstrate that it was not a legitimate constitutional exercise of the president's authority. Then you still have to prove that the person was guilty of a crime. So I think that's the context in which this has to arise. And I do agree with you that I think the presumption should be that the pardon is of effect, and
Right.
the person would have to prove, the government would have to prove that it's not.
Right, right, and a lot of these principles, and this is why, for listeners, I found law school incredibly fascinating, because we would have all of these hypothetical types of conversations, and I'm sure that law students currently are probably debating these very questions, and perhaps applying, some types of principles, because the pardon itself appears to be valid, at least on face, but do we then go outside, what we call the four corners of the document, and say, well, what about intent? And, was this also void versus voidable, which means, of course, that at least in legal speak, that a void document is invalid from the beginning and can't be enforced, often due to illegal activity or incapacitation on behalf of the signer, whoever ratified a contract or that document, versus voidable, that's valid, that can be enforced, but one party has the option to cancel it for a legal reason. And that's kind of the voidability, or voidable, is where I see President Trump's Truth Social post. Like, he's trying to say, listen, I'm the president now, I'm trying to void these. I don't really think that matters. I think this was more of a PR issue, and trying perhaps to prompt the Attorney General to go after, and the DOJ to go after, some of these people criminally, like Fauci. But the question likely will be whether or not these pardons were invalid from the beginning and can't be enforced. Do you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I do. And Joe Biden pardoned more people than any president in history, and classes of people. And there's no way he signed all of those documents. And I doubt he knew about all of them and intentionally granted pardons to specific people. I mean, the whole exercise of pardon is something that it would be good for the Supreme Court to look at in the appropriate case. I want to reference one of our favorite cases, Jenna, because it says something about this. Marbury v. Madison.
Yes.
1803. We're going back. We're going back into history here.
Way back.
And I don't like Marbury for a lot of reasons, and Jen and I have lectured on this. But Marbury says something, and he says, when the president has signed the commission, he's talking about a commission or an appointment, the signature of the president is a solemn act. Okay? So when you talk about the president's power and him personally exercising his authority under the Constitution, that should mean something. And I want to talk about federalism here, because the reason we use the auto pen so much is because the federal government has grown so big. It has gone beyond the scope of what the Constitution ever envisioned, and it requires the use of auto pens and stamps and things like that. And if we would get back to a federal government that is the size that is more manageable, then maybe the president would actually have the ability to exercise his constitutional power himself personally, the way the founders intended. How about that?
Yeah, I love that. And, everything goes back, of course, to federalism and the idea of
I'll
having
find a way to
government
bring
smaller.
back federalism if I can. You know that.
Yes, and this is one of the reasons that you are a great constitutional law professor, because everything should always come back to first principles, always, right? And one of the first principles of, of course, when we're talking about morality and biblical first principles, but also when we're talking about just basics of the constitutional structure, this really should come back to federalism. And I think you're absolutely right that when the federal government is so big and so huge that the president doesn't have time to sign all of the documents that he needs to sign, then maybe we need to recontemplate whether the alleged job is just massively out of scope. Because if he needs all of these different agencies to delegate to, then we've just gone massively out of proportion. I mean, this goes back to one of our favorite clips as well of Justice Scalia, who was testifying before the U.S. Senate, talking about the beauty of the Constitution having the limited powers. It's not just about our Bill of Rights and all of that. Any banana republic could have that, but limited principles. And he was saying, the founders didn't even know what an excess of legislation was when they put those terms in. I mean, now it's insane how much the federal government is operating, and yet they're still not doing anything, by the way. But I think that your point is so apt. And so, just in the last 2 minutes we have in this segment, do you think that these issues will be challenged, and that we would get the kind of robust, sort of meritorious opinion on the power of the pardon? Or would it just be, we're dismissing this out of hand? I mean, I would like to see some kind of precedent, if this is ultimately challenged, some kind of precedent from the courts to discuss exactly what we're contemplating here.
If there was a court that I would want to adjudicate the constitutional elements here, it would be this court. We've got some amazing jurists on this court who are originalists, constitutionalists of different persuasions, granted, but who, do appreciate and are trying to move our country back towards a more originalist interpretive approach to the Constitution. So this, I think they would find this to be a very interesting and important discussion in the right context. And who has standing to bring this case? The government would be the one who would probably have to move and figure out whether they actually want to do this. I mean, there are lots of things to do. Is this something we should do? Maybe. I will say this also: executive orders. The president does have the authority to do executive orders. It's basically a memo of policy to his administration. So when the president, Donald Trump, says, "I'm revoking all of Joe Biden's executive orders," he has the authority to do that. And he can actually,
but that's
I think
regardless
a social post is a way he could do it.
Right. And that's regardless of auto pen. I mean, that's just something that's policy
right,
that he can revoke at any time. And so, but yeah, and that's a good thing that he's revoking all of those, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And so, devil's in the details. This is a great conversation to have about the Constitution and first principles and federalism. And, is this the kind of country we want to live in, where a president cannot sign bills because he's too busy doing other things? I don't.
Yeah, no, I don't. I completely agree with you. And I think it's going to be very fascinating to see where we get in terms of this legal challenge, because if this were reversed and this was something where the Democrats wanted to prosecute someone that President Trump pardoned, and they had a legal issue as frankly, questionable as this one, and it wasn't just ironclad and there was a possibility, they would be going after that person and filing charges yesterday. And it's going to be, to me, the next interesting question is going to be whether the DOJ actually follows up on this and prosecutes people who, absent a pardon, would be worthy of prosecution. Like, for example, Anthony Fauci. He should be held responsible for any crimes during COVID that fall under criminal law and statute. And it's not just a matter, of political perspective. But if the situation was reversed, that a Democrat DOJ would be going after Republicans. So if for that reason as well, that's why I think that this is important to challenge, so that we get good precedent on the books and there is a little bit more of an expansive discussion. And I agree with you, Mike Donnelly, that I would love to see that opinion come from this Supreme Court, because I think that they would look at this constitutionally and they wouldn't look at it subject to who the pardon is for or who the president was or is or any of those things. So we're already out of time, but really appreciate that analysis. You can follow Mike Donnelly at Donnelly Speaks on X. I'd encourage you to do that for all of his hot takes. We will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning to continue to talk about some interesting legal questions.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
My debt problem started probably about 2016. I needed my life to change financially. I called Trinity and I ended up joining based on high credit card bills and high interest rate. And my counselor at Trinity has been great, and Trinity has been helping me to get on the right path of paying off these credit card bills, bringing down the interest rate. They have consolidated my bills into one low monthly payment. And now I am finally getting out of credit card debt. So I just want to say thank you, Trinity, for showing me a better and greater path.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Sharon, and soon I will be debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
Hi, I'm Doug Chamberlain, host of Family Health Checkup. For over 30 years, Samaritan members have come together to share medical costs and lift each other up in prayer. Now, I'm excited to tell you about Redeem Health Share Ministry, Samaritan's next generation of healthcare sharing. Redeem offers affordable, flexible programs that reflect your values and help you manage medical costs with confidence. Each month, members contribute a share amount to help pay each other's medical bills, and you choose the providers and treatments that are right for your family. It's not insurance, it's a community of believers supporting one another through life's health challenges. So, whether it's a routine visit or a sudden emergency, there's a caring Christian community walking with you every step of the way. Redeem Health Share. It's more than healthcare. It's hope. It's healing. It's faith in action. Call 1-844-REDEEM-0 today. Join the movement. Share joyfully. Live redeemed.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. Republicans are breathing a sigh of relief, retaining control of Tennessee's 7th congressional district and dodging what could have been a political earthquake. There were great fears within the party that Matt Van Epps might lose to state lawmaker Afton Bain, a Zoran Mamdani-style socialist. Bain said she actually hated Nashville, hated country music. What's shocking is she got 45% of the vote. But the socialist surge was not enough to give her a victory. Van Epps cruised to the win with nearly 54% of the vote, thanks to a massive campaign push by President Trump and House Speaker Mike Johnson. A win is a win, but the race exposed a concerning issue. When President Trump is not on the ballot, Republicans don't vote. The previous congressman's victory margin was plus 21, Van Epps plus 9. It's safe to say Tennessee voters were not voting for Van Epps as much as they were voting against a socialist loon. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Well, welcome back. And the next interesting legal headline is, and this coming from Fox News as well, Jack Smith was subpoenaed for a deposition with the House Judiciary Committee. You'll remember Jack Smith, who was in the Biden DOJ and the spearhead of the Trump prosecutions that are now basically defunct. But House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio subpoenaed former special counsel Jack Smith on Wednesday for a deposition escalating Republicans' investigation into one of President Donald Trump's top political foes. Jordan directed Smith to appear before the committee on December 17th, according to a copy of the subpoena reviewed by Fox News Digital. Jordan wrote in a letter accompanying his request, "Due to your service as special counsel, the committee believes that you possess information that is vital to its oversight of this matter." And so even though Smith had already offered to publicly testify before the House and Senate Judiciary Committees, a source, according to Fox News, familiar with Jordan's request, said that a deposition is the chairman's preferred format because each party on the committee can question Smith for an hour at a time and build a better record. In a public hearing, lawmakers typically question a witness in 5-minute intervals. And perhaps, in my opinion, this may reduce some of the more political theatrics that we tend to get when we have the live hearing, or the public hearing. And yet, will this really elicit any valuable information to the Judiciary Committee's oversight, or exactly where is the chairman going? Well, let's welcome in Gerard Folletti, who is senior counsel for the Lawfare Project. And, regardless of where exactly Congress may or may not go on this, Gerard, I think it is important that at least there is a record built on exactly what happened here.
It's very important that there's a record built on exactly what happened. I am just wary that we might not get that record because I anticipate that Jack Smith will use a lot of assertions of privilege to not answer questions. He's going to say that a lot of the information being asked for is attorney work product of the DOJ, and use that as a basis to not answer significant questions. So I think it's very important to start the process of accountability, but I do question how much information we will actually get from this deposition.
That's really interesting. And so, the assertions of privilege, of course, were a really big topic when Trump was being prosecuted and, even targeting some of his lawyers and, including me at the time and saying, that there were assertions of privilege even for attorneys. And then, others, of course, very notably people like Peter Navarro, who wasn't a lawyer, but he asserted, claim of executive privilege and some of those other things were pretty roundly dismissed by the Democrats, at least. And they were suggesting that those claims, were ridiculous in that context. And so I think, of course, the tables will turn, and like they do, they're always hypocrites. So, those same arguments won't apply, in their opinion, to Jack Smith. But where should those privileges actually legally attach if you kind of take politics out of the equation?
If you take politics out of the equation, I think there's a lot to be said for maintaining privilege on deliberations within the Department of Justice on legal issues. But I think that if push comes to shove and this ends up before a judge, which it probably will if Congress wants to compel the testimony, even despite the assertion of privilege, I think you might get a narrow ruling that says that some of these communications, some of these charging decisions are apt for public disclosure because they're not necessarily attorney work product. They are communications with political figures about how and whether to charge.
Yeah, and obviously some of that then would go into a potential coordination between the DOJ and Jack Smith at the time and, some of the states that ultimately ended up prosecuting either Trump or, his associates. And that's, I think, part of the thrust of where the Republicans want to inquire. And so, would some of those kind of coordinations, in your opinion, be covered by privilege, or would that be something that the Judiciary Committee is entitled to?
I think that that's something the Judiciary Committee is entitled to. We're not talking about the mental processes of, how you interpret the law. You're talking about communications with other people to basically find out if someone directed this prosecution or who directed it, what communications were had that were not about whether the law applied, but how to apply it. In other words, if there was an instruction given that Donald Trump or other people be prosecuted, who gave that instruction? Who were those communications with? Maybe those people don't have privilege. Maybe those people have documents or information that's relevant for Congress to understand what happened. So I think that will be the scope of what is permissible, the communications that Jack Smith had with people, especially outside of the Justice Department.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be really fascinating. And so, overall, let's just, hypothetically, the Judiciary Committee is entitled to that information, and this does show coordination or collusion, if that's a little bit stronger of a term, between the DOJ and some of these states, or it shows, some other evidence that these prosecutions were at their inception improper. When we're talking about, and obviously, we all have our opinions on the lawfare question of it, but I'm talking about, more from a basic legal perspective, not necessarily a political one. What kind of evidence would that be? And what could the House Judiciary Committee follow up on other than, maybe a referral to the current DOJ? But in terms of oversight, I would love to see some kind of legislation that protects, both sides, all sides, from lawfare that is just specifically at its inception going after political targets simply because they are political opponents.
Well, and I think that's right. That's the ultimate issue is the oversight and what do we do to change the system, to change the process to make sure that we don't have more lawfare in future years. because ultimately I'm skeptical that you will see successful prosecutions of things here, because if you can make a prima facie case to a judge that you can bring a charge, that doesn't necessarily make it malicious prosecution, even if malice was the reason, and you would never have brought those charges against someone else. So that's really the issue here. It's that fairness. It's how do we keep politics out of this? And the most important thing that can be discovered here, I think, are the mechanisms within the Justice Department and the special counsel's office of, who gives these instructions? What's the oversight? How do we insulate people like Jack Smith from becoming politicized or operating as political weapons? And the most important way to do that is to really have mechanisms in place to stop the type of communications that may have taken place here.
Yeah, and I think that should be the end goal of this, is to recontemplate these parameters and not just allow this type of lawfare. And that has been, something, regardless of, again, of politics in the current day and how everybody feels on, both sides about Donald Trump and all of this, for the precedential value. And that is what the law should always contemplate for the future. There needs to be more guardrails in place so that there isn't this type of lawfare, and also so that there isn't the type of revenge lawfare that that some are alleging, that Trump is now participating in. But I could see, in the future, after he leaves office, more extra revenge or retaliatory revenge on revenge. Where does it stop when that's not the purpose of the judiciary, and it's never the purpose to target a person and then, let's say, let's go manufacture a crime to get them with because we don't like what they stand for politically. And this happens, obviously, and it has happened to more than just Donald Trump and Republicans. I mean, this has happened against conservatives, pro-lifers, people for their political perspective and their political beliefs. And we need to have a better system in place to ensure that if it is a political prosecution, that can be challenged up front, and not necessarily just under the rules of malicious prosecution and, some of those things, which I think is a really, really high standard, and it should be. But at the same time, there needs to be some kind of mechanism in place to prevent this. So, so you're senior counsel of the Lawfare Project, and I think it's very aptly named. So in a perfect world, Gerard Folletti, what would you like to see changed that isn't just a protection for only, conservatives, Republicans, Trump supporters, but overall to make the system actually genuinely more fair?
I think you need three things. You need transparency, you need accountability, and you need consequences. You need transparency in how these decisions are made, especially how these charging decisions or these decisions to bring lawsuits, especially when it's the government, are made, because that's in the public interest. And when you have potential meetings between the staff of Jack Smith and Fani Willis and Letitia James, that's concerning, because you've got multiple people with political agendas communicating, potentially colluding, and without transparency, it does make it look like everything is politicized. You need that accountability, because these people have to be answerable to someone, and perhaps you need to have them answerable to judges outside of the Justice Department and the president, because you need that review. You need that impartial review of these actions. And third, you need consequences, because when there is lawfare, whether it's a private lawsuit by, the Council on American Islamic Relations against someone who's exposing anti-Semitism, or someone waging warfare, legal warfare against the president, the former president, or you for that matter, there need to be consequences when the legal system is abused. Lawyers need to be facing the heat. There needs to be that threat of disbarment and consequences when they bring actions that have no merit or are targeting people. So we need the combination of those three, and maybe this hearing is the start of the Judiciary Committee actually implementing oversight.
We can only hope. I really, really hope that this isn't just the start of more, public kind of made for TV sort of, review, but actually having something substantive come from it. So we will see, and I think that will be incredibly important. But in the last 5 minutes I have with you, Gerard Folletti, I also want to get your take on this Supreme Court case, and this came from Daily Caller, and the headline is Justice Thomas exposes Democrat officials for having no basis to investigate pro-life pregnancy centers. So speaking of lawfare. This is exactly what we're talking about, because in the state of New Jersey, the Attorney General's office admitted to the Supreme Court on Tuesday in oral argument that the state had no basis to investigate a pro-life pregnancy center. There had been absolutely no complaints filed against this pregnancy center. And he also admitted, and you can go and listen to the arguments, he actually admitted to Justice Thomas that after this whole investigation, it could very well end up that the pregnancy center, there was absolutely nothing wrong. And so he's tacitly admitting that the process is the punishment. And I loved how Justice Thomas just brilliantly broke his argument apart and questioned really whether this was lawfare. And so the question before the court is whether a pregnancy center can challenge the validity of a subpoena in federal court before it's actually been enforced. But again, when the process is the punishment, I think the answer to that should be yes, absolutely. And based on the record just before the Supreme Court, there should be some accountability for the state of New Jersey using their power and resources of prosecution to have some kind of accountability for going after and targeting a pro-life pregnancy center just because of lawfare.
I think this is a quintessential example of lawfare. The state opens an investigation on a faith-based pregnancy center, and they issue subpoenas to get information about the donors. Why? Not because there's any suspicion that the center has done anything wrong with its fundraising, but because they want to put that chill in people who are giving money to that organization. Because if you think that the state is subpoenaing information about you, you're less likely to give money to that cause. So this is really the state interfering with a private organization, a faith-based organization, to impose its preference to try to chill that organization's practices. And the mere fact of issuing the subpoena, the mere fact of having this investigation is the lawfare. And absolutely, Thomas is right. And I think we also saw similar comments from Chief Justice Roberts that this is something that should be evaluated by federal courts as a First Amendment violation against or targeting this pregnancy center.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and this is where, in part, when there is lawfare, a lot of times the best way to fight lawfare is to just not allow it to overwhelm you and your resources. I mean, we saw this so much with a lot of President Trump's associates that, literally were bankrupted. I mean, there are so many people who have millions of dollars of legal fees, not ultimately because at the end of the day, they were convicted of anything or anything happened, but it was the process that is the punishment to just dominate their lives in litigation for years and years and years. And this is what the state of New Jersey, it appears, that was the intention, and to have a chilling effect on donors who may be ultimately forced to be public and then be themselves subject to lawfare or harassment. And so this is the kind of perfect example of why the law needs to curtail that, and there needs to be accountability for prosecutors, because, this isn't some private law firm that's going after them, just civilly and expending their own resources. This is an elected or appointed, I'm actually not sure in New Jersey how, where their appointment of their attorney general, but this is somebody in office, in public office, that is using the state resources. So it's not personal to him. The state resources to go after someone who is his own political opponent. That should never happen. And this is exactly why our Bill of Rights has more protections for individuals against the government in the context of process and due process, and in the context of lawfare, really, even though the founders didn't use that term, than any other protection in the Bill of Rights. And I think that, Gerard Folletti, is incredibly important. Closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts is a crazy one, perhaps. I've wondered recently if we shouldn't consider key shifting in this kind of case. When the government violates constitutional rights, it should pay the cost of the defense, because we have seen lawfare waged wrongly, and maybe that's the consequence that deters wrongful prosecutions.
Yeah, I could not agree more, and that should be available to any defendant that was targeted with lawfare, regardless of the outcome of the case, when you can show that it was just a politically motivated target, like we see in this case is First Choice Women's Resource Centers versus Platkin. Go back and listen to that exchange with Justice Thomas. It's fascinating. Gerard Folletti, really appreciate it. We'll be right back with more.
culture is a product of us being placed in a particular location, and it is God's desire that his light bearers would culture or cultivate a particular area.
Join Abraham Hamilton III as he presents the biblical case for cultural engagement. It's a powerful video resource from the American Family Association's Cultural Institute series.
You and I create the culture of our country.
Visit afastore.net.
Weekday mornings at 8 Central, Pastor Jeff Shreve offers real truth for today.
I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church in Texarkana, Texas, and the founder of From His Heart Ministries.
The world around us is rapidly changing, but God and His truth will never change.
I may be the host of the show, but I want God's Word and His truth to be the star of the show.
Join Pastor Jeff Shreve each weekday morning at 8 Central for Real Truth for Today on American Family Radio.
If you are 65 or older, you know this. Inflation is hitting everyone hard right now, especially when it comes to health care. Over the last 10 years, healthcare costs have skyrocketed by, get this, 230%. If you have Medicare Parts A and B, you know there are still out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles and copayments, and they really add up. But here's some good news. MediShare 65 Plus is designed to fill in those gaps and help protect you from rising healthcare costs. At only $99 per month up to age 75, you get peace of mind at a price you can afford. And MediShare is trusted, too. It's been around 30 years. It's not some big impersonal thing. It's a community of people helping each other, business owners, pastors, retirees. People love it. MediShare 65 Plus just makes sense. To learn more, give them a call. They're great to talk to. They'll offer to pray with you each time you call, too. Call now. 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Abraham, I'm coming to you and your wonderful listeners today with a very special request for the month of December, and I'm remembering John 1, where the apostle writes, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The light has shone in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And yet, would you know, in the regions of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, as many as 9 of 10 new believers have never read that scripture in their own Bible because they do not own one.
Everyone wants to read the Bible, but many of them will be sharing a single Bible.
Pastor Carlo there in the Andes Mountains will tell us that Christians are so desperate to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus, they are willing to share a Bible. This December, we want to bless 7,000 Bibleless believers so this year they can read for themselves the true Christmas story. So would you get involved today, Abraham?
$5 sends a Bible. $100 sends 20. $500 sends 100. Give by calling 800-YES-WORD. 800-YES-WORD. Or visit sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, there is a new quote-unquote children's book, and yes, this is being marketed to 5 to 8-year-olds called Abortion is Everything. And it claims to speak directly to these children about abortion. And the book is just downright evil. It is from the group Shout Your Abortion, if you've seen that hashtag trending on social media. And Shout Your Abortion posted to Instagram a celebration of this book as a way to quote-unquote normalize abortion for children in kindergarten through 2nd grade. They post some pictures about this book and say, and this is just directly from their Instagram page, they say, "Abortion is Everything," the title of this book, speaks directly to 5 to 8-year-olds about what abortion is, how it might feel, and why people have abortions. Using accessible, inclusive language, Abortion is Everything frames abortion as the actualization of a uniquely human superpower, our capacity to imagine the future and to make choices that lead us toward the life we envision. Abortion is Everything introduces the concept of abortion in a way that empowers parents and kids to begin rewriting our cultural scripts about abortion at the most foundational level. This is just so incredibly evil. And one of the pictures from this book and the actual language from the book describes the text as saying, once someone becomes pregnant, 3 things can happen. They have a baby. They have a miscarriage, which is when a pregnancy ends before a person gives birth to a baby, or they have an abortion, which is when a person ends their pregnancy instead of having a baby. And obviously, the moral equivalence that they are attempting to go for is very dominant in that text. This is just utterly insane that this book is framing abortion as a superpower and the ability to imagine the future without your siblings, your friends, or perhaps, your future spouse, and to 5 to 8 year olds. This is just so incredibly sad. So let's welcome in our next guest. Sarah Gable Seifert is the president and co-founder of Everyday Life, America's fastest growing pro-life diaper company. And she's also the architect behind the viral Make More Babies campaign. She's a mom of 2, an entrepreneur, and a cultural commentator, and was the catalyst that brought this horrendous book to my attention. So Sarah, thank you very much for that. And I just can't believe, I can, but I still can't believe that the left and this organization, Shout Your Abortion, is this explicit with their immorality.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And it's a sad subject to have to even be discussing. But the reality is, Shout Your Abortion, this pro-abortion activist group, the fact that their whole mission is to normalize abortion is a very, very sad use of time. And they're using their methods of spreading this lie that abortion is everything through storytelling and through media campaigns. And the fact that now they have come out with a children's book for 5 to 8 year olds, helping parents teach their kids that abortion is a tool that helps human beings build the life that they can imagine for themselves, and even sharing things that the whole world around us has actually been shaped by abortion. The real truth here is that abortion is not everything. It actually ends everything. It ends a heartbeat. It ends a future, a God-ordained life. It ends the opportunity for a mom or a dad to become a parent, which is the most rewarding and fulfilling job one could ever embark upon. And so the fact that this is being taught to the youngest of kids, I think really paints a clear picture that the culture of death is real and that our society really needs to be working hard to push the opposite message. And that as parents, we need to be very intentional with teaching the fundamental truth at the earliest of ages that life is a gift, that life is precious, that it's worthy of our care and our protection from the moment of conception. Because if we do not tell our kids these things, then books like Abortion is Everything will. And that is a very scary thought, because we need to be a society that is building up strong families, because strong families build a strong nation. So I'm glad that you're talking about this situation and this horrible book that has been released, because we need to be informed. We need to be aware that there are agendas out there that are really trying to knock down the family unit.
Yeah, so well said, Sarah. And these activists are trying to catechize and disciple and indoctrinate our children. And we need to ensure that children in our homes and in our society grow up in the truth. And the truth is that life begins at conception. Every human being is made in the image of God, has inherent dignity and worth and value. Those aren't debatable questions. That is just the empirical truth as our founders described it, the self-evident truth. It's not just something that comes from a place of religious belief or something that our society collectively can determine one way or the other on policy. And yet, there are these leftist activists that are suggesting to children as young as 5 something far, far different, and they are propagating this lie. And so as far as I can tell, this book from Shout Your Abortion is only available on their website. I don't think that it's, at least yet, in stores. They did kind of this fundraising campaign in order to be able to publish it on Amazon. But at the same time, you never know if some crazy activist is going to buy it and give it to a local library or any of these things. And so one of the things that I did was go in my home state of Florida, go to yesterday to my commissioner of education And he responded and said that he's going to make sure that this book is nowhere in Florida's public schools or libraries. I'm really grateful for that. So I would encourage everyone to be activists in your own communities to stop this kind of propaganda. And so, Sarah, what are other steps that we can take to actively reject this kind of propaganda?
I think that Live Action's a great group that is a pro-life activist organization that just came out with a book titled I'm a Baby, Watch Me Grow. And it's really the opposite message of what we're seeing here with this book, Abortion is Everything. And this beautiful book shows images of life at the moment of conception, teaching young kids at the age of 5 that life is precious, that it deserves to be loved and stewarded well, and that we should celebrate God's creation from the moment of conception, and that from the very beginning of time, he already knew us by name. He knows every hair on our head. And that's a beautiful message to be teaching 5-year-olds. And so I would encourage everyone to not only get engaged on a local level, but also let's be sure to prop up the educational resources like this example with Live Action, and let's get those books in our home and let's be reading them to our children and teaching them these very fundamental truths from the very, very beginning, because it's only going to set them up for success as they grow up in this world that we're all trying to work so hard to create a world in which their life is celebrated, that they are taught these things. But the reality is there is a countercultural message out there, and we need to be fighting up against that every way that we can.
Yeah, absolutely well said. And it's no surprise that the left is targeting children as young as between 5 and 8, because if they can sell these lies and these false views and these perversions of the truth, then it becomes harder and harder as kids age, and then of course as they become adults to correct that thinking. And we have to be very wise in terms of the culture and give our children the ability to answer those positions and those policies with truth, so that we have the message of truth everywhere, not just in our churches, but even in conversations with, a lot of these activists that are just peddling this utter nonsense. And so I think this is just insane that this kind of book is termed a children's book and is even remotely possibly in the hands of 5 to 8-year-olds. But I'm so glad, Sarah, that you've brought attention to this. In just the last minute or so we have in this, tell us a little more about your organization, Every Life, and how we can support that as well.
Absolutely. So Every Life, as you mentioned, is the first and only pro-life diaper company on the market today. Believe it or not, every major diaper company today is supporting abortion either vocally or financially. And when I discovered this reality a little over 2 years ago, my husband and I felt an obligation to create the hopeful solution. And now we're the fastest growing diaper company in America today. And we have high performing, clean, premium products for every miraculous life that are shipped right to your doorstep. So if you're a mom listening, I would encourage you to go to everylife.com, set up a subscription, join the Changing Lives Club is what we call it when you become a subscriber, and you actually get to help us change lives. On the 3rd month, you can donate a whole box of diapers to your local pregnancy center or church. And we've already had the chance in just a little over 2 years of donating over 7 million diapers to pregnancy resource centers who are in urgent need of these supplies so they can help moms and dads who have embraced life for their babies. And that's really why we exist. We're so much more than just a diaper brand. We really want to shift culture and to prop up the family unit. And we're doing that every way that we can. So join us on our mission. We also have a Buy for a Cause program. If you don't have a baby in diapers, but you want to support our mission, you can donate $50 and we'll ship that diaper to a mom who desperately needs the essentials. Thank you so much again for having me, and it's been an honor to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Go to everylife.com, and hey, 'tis the season. Buy for a cause. This is a great mission. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.